Today's guest is not only Colorado's MUFON state director, but also a star investigator and lead for MUFON's Mars team. She's co-host of the MUFON What's Up radio broadcast on kgradb.com and has authored a book on UFOs with another on the way. Please give a massive Koit welcome to Katie Paige. KoitCast! Hello there, Katie, and welcome to KoitCast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem. It's a pleasure to invite you. I suppose my first question will be this, and for all the people who aren't in the know, can you explain MUFON? What it is, what do they do, etc., etc.?
Right. Well, MUFON stands for the Mutual UFO Network, and we are global. So, we have our international MUFON as well as here in the United States. We have a chapter in every state. I am the state director for Colorado. And basically, in a nutshell, what we do is if you see something you can't explain in the sky, you go to MUFON.com, you fill out a report, both for physical sightings, and we also have something called the ERT, which is the Experience Resource Team, headed up by Kathleen Martin, who is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. She started the ERT, so if you have a possible abduction or a contact experience, you can also go to MUFON.com and fill out that form. And what will happen is, depending on where you're located, you'll get a local field investigator who, by the way, goes through rigorous training both at MUFON University. The manual to test and all that is pretty thick. So we do have a really good program to mentor our field investigators, and we have 90 days to investigate your case to come to a conclusion. And we have different categories. IFOs are identified flying objects, and they could be man-made or natural. Examples of that would be man-made would be a satellite or an airplane. Natural could be a bug, a bird, something like that. And then we have, our hoaxers out there, so we can close the case as a hoax.
Yes, we don't like those ones.
No, we don't. But it's a good group of people. Here in Colorado, we meet the second Saturday of every month, and we bring in guest speakers, and it's just a good organization to get involved in, just to find people that are interested in the things that, we're interested in. So.
And in your area then, how many people are as part of that Colorado thing? Are you talking hundreds or?
Well, we have hundreds of members, but a typical MUFON meeting on a Saturday will have anywhere between 75 to 100, depending on the speaker and, the weather and everything else, the time of year. We have now 26 field investigators in the state of Colorado, which is quite a few. But we do average, anywhere between 10 to 20 cases per month we'll get in for the state of Colorado. Yeah.
So a lot of work to get through.
A lot of work.
Yeah, I imagine it is. Now, as part of your training to become a MUFON investigator, is there like an exam at the end of it?
Oh yeah, you have to take an exam.
Whoa.
It's open book, so you do the highlighter and you go through. But yeah, I mean, I study for a good couple months, and then you take the exam and you go through a background check, because if you're visiting somebody's home to investigate a case or a sighting, we want to make sure our field investigators are vetted that way. So we do put you through a background check and everything like that. And 85 to 90% of the time we can explain what you've seen. In fact, there's so many Starlink sightings that if you go to MUFON.com, there's actually, if you've seen this, don't fill in a report, because so many people there for a while were filing the Starlink satellites. But yeah, it keeps us busy for sure.
I bet it do. Now, let's talk about your journey into the paranormal theater, so to speak.
Right.
Can you tell us what brought you into the topic?
Right. Yeah. So have you heard of the infamous Skinwalker Ranch out there in Utah?
Yes. And hopefully everyone watching this will have seen the TV show.
Yeah. So my family and I, when I was a young girl, had experiences on a similar ranch here in Colorado. And I was threatened and warned never to talk about what happened out there. We never knew anybody knew anything about it or that it was investigated or anything. So, I had so many, we call it high strangeness events, that has kind of followed me throughout my whole life, a lot of it being paranormal in nature. So I kind of started out way back in the 90s, kind of really getting into the ghost hunting side of things. And then I was watching a documentary on television, learned about MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. I joined in 2012, came in right as a field investigator. And because I wanted to try and find out what all those strange things that happened out on that ranch were. And in 2013, I picked up a book entitled Hunt for the Skinwalker. And at that time, the Skinwalker Ranch and all that wasn't as well known as it was back then. And I just thought, well, maybe this will have some similarities to what happened. And I opened to the chapter Other Hotspots, started reading about the ranch in my childhood. And I knew it had to be the ranch because of, it was a ranch in Colorado. I knew the strange dynamics of the family. And so in that book, it said there were 3 PhDs that investigated the ranch. And that was the first time I had ever learned it was even known about or investigated. And in fact, I found out it was investigated by APRO and Dr. Leo Sprinkle, PhD, who for over 40 plus years was a pioneer in the field of both past life regression and hypnosis for contactees. And he lives 2.5 hours away in Laramie, Wyoming. Unfortunately, he passed recently, but I just drove that weekend and I pulled all the original documents from the ranch. And so, as you can see here, it's been a 10-year journey of digging on what all that was out there on that ranch in Colorado, and what was happening.
I'm intrigued by one of the first things you said in that little talk there, where you said about you were warned off.
Yes.
By whom and what did they say?
Right. It was the most incredible validation. So I have a sister, she's older than I. And so when all this was occurring for me, I'm 9 to 12 years old. I'm a pretty young girl, and my sister's a little older. And then all the subsequent kids were older still. And then my mother and all the people around on the ranch. What I want to make clear to your listeners is I did not live on this ranch property full time. I lived an hour away from the ranch. So we would travel back and forth. The 2 youngest boys lived with us an hour away, but on the weekends we'd bring them back to visit their mother and things like that. So I spent some time at the ranch property, and every time we had strange things happen. But the warning came from the scariest night on the ranch property. It was the boys' mother's birthday. It was a weekend night. All the adults were in the house. And you have to remember, so this area, it wasn't just localized to the ranch area. This was the whole county in Elbert County, Colorado. This is where Linda Moulton Howe got her start as an investigative journalist, because the mutilations that were occurring out there at the time were happening daily. And we're not just talking cows, but we're talking horse and sheep, and even buffalo were reported out there, dog, and people were on high alert. You had loaded shotguns by the door. You just didn't come up to somebody's house at night, without a warning. So all this was occurring, these strange unmarked helicopters. One of the first things that were reported out there were these hums and tones. So on that night that we were threatened and warned, it was early. It was like midnight. The adults are playing board games, celebrating, the birthday. And me, my sister, and the 3 other boys that lived on the ranch, we were all in their bedroom, and that hum started up. That it was like a low tone hum, and anytime that hum started, something was so everybody was immediately on edge. And then all the power in the house went out, and when the power went out, it was like it came out of every corner of the house. It was this disembodied, like electrical sounding voice that basically said, we have allowed you to remain, we have interfered with your lives very little, your friends will be warned to remain silent concerning us. Don't cause us to take action, which you will regret. And my mom and the adults, so we got the warning from that whatever voice, which my thought is that military, were they doing black access projects? Because the Air Force Academy owned the land up there. And through the files and all the research I've done, we know that there were soldiers there from Camp Carson. There was talk of like MK Ultra mind control. We know NORAD was aware of the property. I even talked to Richard Doty, who was aware of the property. So for my mission and my goal has always been, how much of this is military black access projects, how much of it is paranormal unknown, and which came first, the chicken or the egg? Was the
Yeah,
military out there researching these high strangeness events like the mutilations and all these, or were they causing it? So that's sort of been my mission and my drive, and what motivates me every day to just keep reading and learning and all that, because and it depends on what day you catch it. Like, I ebb and flow, like, no, it's mostly unknown, or no, it's mostly military. And I think it's really a combination of both things were going on at the same time. But it was really interesting when John Schuessler, who was one of the founding fathers of MUFON, learned of my connection to the ranch. He bestowed upon me the original document, and in there it had the quote from the adults at the time with that exact quote from that night. And for me, because I had just big, little memories, and so did my sister, to see it in writing and to actually see the words that we remembered was like, oh my gosh, that
did happen,
happened.
sort of thing.
It
Yeah,
did
yeah.
happen. Yeah. Same with the circles on the ground and so much more.
And what did you put it down to? If you look back now, I mean, back then you probably would have gone, whoa, what the hell? But now,
Yeah.
looking it through adult eyes and having those reports in front of you, what do you think that voice was? To me, on first hearing that, and I've never heard this story before, by the way, that could be, like sound waves fired at the house from different sides or whatever, couldn't it? Is that
Right,
what you think it is? Or do you go in a different route?
My thought, it was that for a long time. Like, it's the military trying to scare us off the property or something like that. Like, they can, like, a lot of the phenomenon out there, even the very, very bright light that was out the window that night could have been a spotlight or something. I mean, all that stuff could be hoaxed or faked to scare. But here's where I struggle. That property sat vacant for 10 to 12 years before they purchased the ranch. So if the military wanted the property, they could have just purchased the property.
Yeah,
and
makes
so
sense.
I'm kind of like, that doesn't make any sense to me that they would do that. And then you add all the other high strangest things that were occurring at the time: the mutilation, the unmarked helicopters, the circles on the ground, these strange disappearing boxes, and so on. It really begs the question then, was that something else? There were two very unusual ET beings reported to be spotted out there, not by one or two witnesses, but several witnesses, including the undersheriff at the time. So, doing through the years, going and doing these interviews and learning of other people's encounters, including the sheriff of the town, and knowing what he encountered, it puts into question then maybe it was not the military, and maybe it was something else.
Either way, it's amazing for you to process in your brain, and like you said, it flip-flopping from one to the other, because both are fascinating if they are true. So can you give us then what you would class as the history of the Clearview Ranch, and then from all your research, what was the first event, etc., and then how did it go on? Because I'm keen to, I've never heard this before, so I'm keen to hear the story of the ranch. Essentially, I've heard the Skinwalker Ranch no end of times, and that's intriguing. So hopefully this is the same.
Right. Well, the Elbert, it was known as Clearview Ranch because they didn't want people to be aware of the true location, because they didn't want, the notoriety of this small town. But the height of all this activity occurred from 1975 to 1978. So it predates the Skinwalker Ranch. And like I said, the first sort of notable things were these strange hums and bangs from underground. So there's been talk of, could they possibly be tunneling, maybe from New Mexico up through NORAD, through Wyoming, up into Montana to Malmstrom. So we have that theory. But there was this phenomenon of these strange unmarked helicopters that really, it hit Colorado. There's a really great little research book out there called The Choppers and the Choppers. And at the time, the theory was, could these be like cults doing these mutilations? And are these helicopters flying in, causing the mutilations? I think now research and people who really delve deep into the mutilation phenomenon, which we can thank Linda Moulton Howe, Christopher O'Brien, and Chuck Zukowski are the three names that come to mind, that really took a deep dive into the cattle mutilations. And I just talked to Chuck Zukowski recently, and he's like, no, this has been going on for decades. We can pretty much safely rule out cults or human intervention, because still there's no there's no traces of that. And these mutilations are still occurring to this day, not to the degree they were back then, but still occurring to this day. So it's my belief that the perpetrators of that are from somewhere else. And now why they're doing it, there's a lot of different theories out there. I don't know. But so we have reports of that. We have definitely a lot of indications that there were Black access projects going on. One of the reports was that there was a gentleman by the name of Warren. His last name was redacted out, from Camp Carson. He visits the ranch, felt something take over his mind, made him walk towards the woods. So out there in Elbert County, it's kind of it's wide open and like prairie where you can raise cattle, but you also have these patches of forest of ponderosa pines, but they're smaller patches. And so he felt something like draw him to the wood line, and it said it would release him and he'd run back to the ranch house, and did this to him 5 times. In other words, something was controlling his mind. We had encounters of disappearing boxes that were lit and black. In these reports, now I didn't witness it. It claimed the ET said these boxes were lethal. We had Sasquatch reports out there. And what's interesting is out there, and I know this is controversial, but the Sasquatch were kind of connected with the UFO sightings and the orb sightings. So a lot of craft and lights flying off the property. A memory that I have, it was a spring day here in Colorado. In Colorado, we get this wet, heavy snow, but it'll be like a nice day out, 50, 55, 60 degrees. It was one of those days, and we were out at the ranch property, and my sister and I were flipping the Frisbee back and forth, and we looked down and there was this big, huge circle, and it was dry dirt, but the outside of the circle was wet snow. So the investigator side of me goes, well, could there have been a missile silo there or something? But there wasn't, in researching the history of the property. And in the briefing document, they actually were out there measuring. It was a 75-foot diameter, another validation that I have a memory of that was in the report. And there were drops of blood in the snow outside the circle, that snowless, dry circle, and nothing grew for years in that circle. So I don't know what that was about.
Almost like a radiated soil sort of thing, which kept some measure of heat, or at least gave off some radiation that then melted the snow.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So in researching the provenance of the area, I found it interesting because in a lot of these documents, it referred to the ranch as the old Baker Ranch. And so I'm like, oh, I really want to research just the area in general to see if there's any similarities to these other high strangeness locations like Skinwalker Ranch. And what I found here in Elbert County, I mean, there's a huge, especially in that area, very traumatic Native American heritage where a lot of horrific events occurred. There we had the Ute, the Cheyenne, the Apache, the Navajo, the Pawnee, the Kiowa, and one of the bloodiest massacres called the Sand Creek Massacre happened just right there on the county line there. So there's a lot of that. But I also came across an article of a gentleman named Dick Mulligan, who was born and raised on this property. And later in life, he became one of the caretakers for Winter Park Ski Resort here in Colorado. And he was known for bold exaggeration and the gift of storytelling and gab. And I thought, oh boy, he wasn't telling stories. He lived on the ranch and nobody
believed him.
Nobody believed him. So there's a longer history of things occurring before the military arrived, which makes me believe that this predates the military coming in and investigating.
Yeah. Now, you've said something amazingly interesting there that I can't let go. These boxes. What the hell? What is that?
Yeah, right. For years I didn't talk about it because I'm like, that is so strange. Like, disappearing boxes. And I have a personal experience with that in the daytime. It was me, the youngest son, and my mom's boyfriend. My mom was dating the owner of the ranch. And there was a little outbuilding right up by the side of where the tree line is. So we went to get something out of the outbuilding, and then we were driving the pickup truck along the woods. But while we were sitting there by the outbuilding, that hum started up. It was like a bee sound, like if you've ever stood under electrical wires or something, it's like that kind of a sound. And then all of a sudden the father's like, get in the truck, get in the truck. We look back, and about 3-4 feet off the ground was this box. And to my memory, it was just hovering there. It was making this sound, and we're jumping in the back of the pickup truck with the hound dog. And I look back, and it was gone. So, and in these reports, the police officer saw it. Matter of fact, he said he saw a tree in the same box where he said there was no road, there was nothing, and he drove up close enough to take a good look at it, but didn't want to approach it. So he drives back to town to get a posse sheriff. The two of them come back, and he says in this report that the box and the tree appeared to go underground, as if it just went underground.
How weird.
And so, yeah, it's weird. So I didn't talk about these boxes for a while, until on Skinwalker Ranch, they had an encounter with a strange box that disappeared. And also Trey Hudson has caught these strange big boxes on Fleur at the South Skinwalker Ranch. So I'm like, okay, other people have had encounters with these strange boxes. I don't know what they were, who they're tied to, if they're extraterrestrial in nature or if they're military in nature. I had a woman come up to me one time after I spoke at a conference, and in interviewing some of these ranchers that had cattle that were mutilated, one of the things the ranchers had noticed, that in the pastures where the mutilations were occurring, the cattle would all be herded together and really calm. But in adjoining pastures, they would be all freaked out and kind of going wild. And so a woman came up to me and she goes, have you ever thought maybe that those boxes were emitting some sort of tone or frequency to maybe calm and quiet the cattle or herd them or control them in some way, and sort of, or maybe even a communication device or something like that? I'm like, that's an interesting theory. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, these boxes, what size were they? Color? And did they give off a glow or anything like that?
Yeah, they were black, about 18 inches long.
Well, like jet black or gloss black?
Like a dull black to and they had lights on them. That's how I remember them. They are described in the report. Another validation to my encounter. I'm like, there's the boxes. And interesting, they said in this report, no, I didn't witness this, but they said, like, if the Sasquatch approaches the box, that the box could be lethal. And according to the report, the adults in the situation witnessed a Sasquatch being dropped to his knees as he approached the box. I don't know if it happened. I didn't witness it, but it's in the report.
That is another weird thing. Now, here's a thought that came to mind when you said about the tree going down as well. That brings instantly to mind an elevator, doesn't it, of some variety? Has that been investigated?
Well, for me, it could be that, like, if they're tunneling underground, right? Maybe there's something to that. But it also brings the like portal, or So
I just like recently a portal closing. Yeah.
So I just recently filmed with a show called Beyond Skinwalker on History Channel. It's the 3rd episode. It's called the Rocky Mountain Ranch. So if you watch that episode, you'll kind of see my first time back at the ranch since I was a young girl, which was a crazy experience. But one of the coolest things that happened out there, well, several things happened, but that very first night back at the ranch, we got an unexpected blizzard. So we're out there, it's close to midnight. We had our headlamps on, the snow's just blowing, it's freezing cold. We're going over barbed wire fence. They wanted to see where the box was on the tree line. So I'm taking the film crew back there, and I'm kind of in front of everybody, directing everybody where to walk, to my memory where this had occurred. And in the snow, you see just a blanket of white snow, and then you see these bipedal big tracks go one in front of the other, not like an animal, and then it disappeared. So that was maybe 12, 13 feet of these tracks. And then they disappeared for about 15, 20 feet. And then they reappeared and disappeared again, as if something came up from underground, walked, went back under, came up, walked, and then disappeared again. It was the strangest thing. And that's in the episode. Because there were cryptid birds seen there, these large cryptid birds.
The thunderbirds, is that
like them? Thunderbirds.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know what that is. It could be portal. It could be elevators. I'm not sure.
Weird boxes nonetheless. Now, you mentioned the humming. Was there any like static on your hair or anything like that related to it? Was there any physical effects?
But that night, physical effects, yes. And several adults in that had visited the ranch and lived on the ranch experienced paralysis and feeling like if they saw the light or the hum, they would go paralyzed for several minutes. And in fact, that one night, and this is what's really interesting, for years I compartmentalized a lot of the things that had happened to me, paranormal and the shadow people and all that happened at my house. I never connected to the ranch. I thought they were separate things until Skinwalkers at the Pentagon came out and they started talking about this hitchhiker effect.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people that visit these high strange locations have this phenomenon kind of follow them throughout their lives. And that's certainly the case with me. So that night that we had that disembodied voice and all that, we got in the car, we drove the hour back to my house. And when I got home, I fell to the ground and was paralyzed for several minutes and I couldn't speak. And I would just remember my mom and my sister, like, what did you eat? What did you eat? What's wrong with you? And I couldn't talk. And I had my first full-blown migraine headache that night, where you're all that stuff. And I suffered those for weeks after. So I don't know if I was hit with a burst of energy or whatever. But yeah, I never connected that hitchhiker effect until, other people had that same phenomena happen to them. And I don't know what that is or what is attached to you, but it can be quite frightening. And in fact, as a young girl, I was very, very frightened. All those years, always slept with big sister, never slept alone. I was terrified all the time. And now that I'm older, I feel like more empowered and I can try to figure out what all this was.
Now, when you see this shadow person, is it what they say is you're seeing it in your peripheral vision over there, or is it blatant?
It's pretty blatant because it's pretty close right to the bed or inside the doorway at the foot of the bed. And yes, you see it really clear in your peripheral and you can glance. And I mean, they were tall. They're usually in 2s or 3s. And I would just under the covers and just freeze and not move, like freeze. So yeah, I don't know who or what those are. And several people have had that same thing happen. So, it's I don't know.
That would scare the living bejesus out of me, I think that.
Right.
Yeah. Now let's parse those
sure.
things out. They could be some measure of spirit entity or something, but they could also be some sort of alien with a cloaking device and all that malarkey.
Right.
Where has your mind gone?
Right. Well, it's kind of funny. My father, who passed away in 1996, he's been gone for a while. He didn't believe in anything. He's like, when you die, you're dirt. And he certainly didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in anything. Well, his third wife passed away in their home. And after she passed, let's put it this way, his mind was changed. He so much happened to him that he had to leave the house. And then after he left the house, I moved into that house for a while, and I can say I have no qualms getting on the show and saying I 100% believe in ghosts and spirits. But whatever these shadow beings were not like it wasn't like my dad's ex-wife. It's very different than like my father haunting me or a loved one or a spirit or a ghost like that. It's something different. I can definitely tell the difference between a tall shadowy being that usually come in 2s or 3s and my dad or my dad's ex-wife. Like they're very different phenomenon in my experience. So I'm not sure what those shadow beings are or who they are. I don't know if they're extraterrestrial in nature, if they're good spirits, bad spirits, or whatever, but I can tell the listeners, and even for myself now that I'm not 9-10 years old anymore, that you really have to be careful with opening those kind of things up, those channels up, and you have to protect yourself. I don't want anything bad coming around me, because still to this day, I have just strange phenomenon that will occur, What was that?
Now with these beasts, these black entity, whatever they are, have they caused any physical damage, or are they just like lurkers essentially watching, that sort of thing?
I don't know if they're like watchers. It's interesting you say watchers. And the one experience I had, and this occurred in 2013 when I kind of reopened this whole investigation and kind of really focused my energy on, and there's something to be said about us being involved in creating the phenomenon in general. Because when we ignore it, when, you know, I went to college, got my degree, was working, raising kids, and you're kind of tuned out of it, you don't really manifest a lot of this. So I'm a believer that people can manifest activity around them. I've seen it over and over again, not just in the UFO world, but in the paranormal world as well, where if we're really focused on something, the power of our minds can in fact create things to occur. So when I started really opening up this box again and getting really into this, I had a very, very unusual experience happen to me. And thankfully for me, others have experienced it as well, because I was like, what is this? And luckily too, I journaled about it. So I always like to tell listeners, if you have any unusual things occur, write it down, date, time, exactly what happened, and you're going to be glad you did, because we tend to forget things. And this particular event, I'm glad I journaled it, because what happened was I was sleeping. My boys at the time were really into Legos, so they had their Lego bucket, you know, in the corner. It falls over and wakes me up, and I look, and in the corner of my bedroom is a basketball-sized blue orb, and it's just hovering there. And the auto light from the neighbors behind us was turning on and off. So my husband at the time, I'm like, you know, Steve, wake up. And as soon as he woke up, his eyes focused on that blue orb. And as he was we're like looking at the smoke detector, the light on the cable box, trying to figure out what I'm looking at. And the thing just went, it just on itself. And that was a very strange thing, but it really felt like it was monitoring, or like I don't know what it was. And those blue orbs are mentioned in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Other people have seen those same blue orbs. And in that book, it states, don't assume it's supernatural in nature. In other words, that could be our own technology that we have. I don't know if I believe that or not, but that's what that book's. I'm like, that's really interesting to ponder. But the timing of it was really strange, because it was just as I was getting back into all this research, as I don't know if it was a warning, if it was a watching, what, but I was happy that Steve saw it too. Otherwise I would have thought, like, you know, and then to see that other people have had the same thing, I was like, okay.
Did it give off light, or was it just like
it
blue
did.
in and of itself?
It was blue in of itself. It gave out light, you know, in the orb itself. It
didn't light up the room though.
It was no, it was a very smoky blue, almost like the blue on the shirt. Actually, it was like this color. And it kind of got dense, and then boom, really strange.
Now I've heard loads of people talking about the orbs, and it's always struck me that they potentially are spirits, like a manifestation of a spirit come back, or a manifestation of someone with an outer body experience or something like that. You know, that's the soul.
Right. Yeah. It definitely felt intelligent. Whatever it was, felt intelligent or alive. And I've also heard, and I've read, and just trying to figure out what the heck, that they've had like healing, like these orbs can heal. And some people say they can harm as well. So I don't know what to believe, you know, but well,
that's the thing, isn't it? Because other people I've spoken to again have said a lot of these experiences that we have are all benevolent, if I can get the word out. And yet you've got the side that's saying there's harm to it. So how can you ever believe unless you have an experience that is benevolent or is harmful?
Right. And I've had both. So, you know, and I always tell people, like, if somebody claims to have all the answers, like, yes, it's all good, it's all bad, it's this or that, they don't know. I don't know. I mean, we don't know. I don't know. When we put human motives on something that's so unusual, we don't know why they're here, what they're here, if they're ours, I mean, I just don't know. And that's really why I just keep researching. Dr. Leo Sprinkle's office, when I went to now all his stuff, there's like 74 plus boxes at the Heritage Center. So if you go to the town of Laramie, Wyoming, anybody can go and look at all his research. That's where the book came from, Letters of Love and Light, that I wrote. But in the file for the ranch were these drawings of the ETs that were spotted out there, and they're very unusual. They're like nothing I've ever seen before.
It's like something from Doctor Who or something. That one.
I know, isn't that really unusual? So I kind of kept it in my back pocket, and I didn't share it with anybody. And at the time, I was the guest speaker coordinator for Colorado MUFON, and I invited this nice gentleman that wrote a book called Flashbacks. His name's Sean Bartok, and I knew it was about his property in Colorado that had high strangeness. And I'm like, okay, and he wrote a book. So I'm like sitting in the third row watching his presentation. Turns out his property was 14 miles from the ranch property. Okay. And I'm sitting there watching his PowerPoint presentation, and up on the screen comes an entity that he spotted on the property. This is it right here. These tubes, he said, came out like these tubes. I don't know about you, but the wrinkles, the heavy brow, the shape of the eyes, the wrinkles around the mouth. And then he had this drawing, which is the tubes out. So just like the one in Elbert County with the tubes coming out. And these, I never knew him. He didn't know me. And these places were 14 miles apart. Then I got to thinking there was an issue of popular mechanics, and they had a whole thing about AI and how they have these tubey things and AI. So I'm wondering if these entities spotted out there were AI. The other type of entities seen out there or reported to be seen out there were the Nordics, these blonde, blue-eyed Nordics. And in these reports, they said they were in conflict with one another. In other words, don't mind us, we won't bother you, but we are doing our thing here and we're in conflict in that. And then this was the drawing of the Sasquatch out there. That guy.
He's a nice hairy dude, that one.
Yep.
Now, these Nordics then are in theory, based on that stuff mentioned, are in conflict with that spud face looking one.
Yep. That's what the reports say. That the Nordics were in conflict with these AIs. So is that a hint to us? Maybe there's this battle going on out there, like, I don't know.
The whole thing, as I've said this many times across many of these episodes I've done, it's almost too much for us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you're going down one thread and then a million others open, and then it's like, whoa, it's too much.
Right. Especially with these high strangeness ranch locations. That's so true.
Yeah. Okay, so let's quickly talk about Bigfoot before you get back to the stories of all the weird things you've seen. I'm interested in the Bigfoot thing. It's obviously could be a flesh and bone creature, and I'm yet to speak to someone on that basis. But there's also the school of thought that says it's an interdimensional being that comes along with the UFOs, and then, like you said earlier, it comes in and out of this dimension for whatever purpose, and then rods off again, and we don't know why. Hence why there's no bodies and no, like hair sample, or a lot of hair samples anyway.
Right.
Where do you stand on it?
I think that possibly they could be spiritual creatures like that can come in and out. I also believe it would make sense to me, especially with my experience and what I've researched through other witnesses and testimony from the ranch area, that they could be bodyguards, workers, and connected to the craft. Maybe they're the ETs themselves and they're highly intelligent and they're flying these craft. I mean, that thought came to me. Well, why couldn't this guy be just kind of like Chewbacca in Star Wars? I mean, I don't know. But maybe we have in certain areas around the world that maybe they have taken root and lived there permanently. So I think all answers are feasible and possible, and maybe both are occurring. Because certainly out in Elbert County, and I've said this, and I like sitting in the window seat on airplanes, and I'm looking down, and you could see, if you just had infrared, you could find Sasquatch easily. We have the technology to locate Sasquatch especially in these little small groups of ponderosa pines. If Sasquatch is really there, he has to be interdimensional or be able to cloak or disappear, because we would see him otherwise. So it has to be one of those answers. And there's I'm not really into Bigfoot, and I wasn't for a long time. I actually just recently went with Jim Myers. He owns the Sasquatch Outpost here in Bailey, Colorado, and we just went on a Sasquatch hunt.
Nice.
But there's a lot of people, just like in ufology, that have so many credible reports of seeing these creatures, and same with Mothman and all these other cryptids. And I'm like, okay, it's taken me a while to get there, but there has to be something to these thousands upon thousands upon thousands of reports.
There's no smoke without fire, is there, in this sort of stuff?
So I don't think everybody's making this stuff up.
No, but I'm just giving you $10,000 for you in a suitcase. Where are you placing it? Flesh and blood, or something else?
Something else. something interdimensional.
That's also where I placed the bet.
Yeah.
I think it's something like 60-40, but because I also think the same as you. I've heard it before on another radio show or something where one of the Bigfoot researchers said they were going to do satellites doing that very same thing with the infrared. I can't remember the name of the chap, but that was on the agenda. So that will be interesting to see what comes of that.
Right. I mean, I would think they're easily spotted. But
you'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
An interesting one, that. Okay, so let's get back to the ranch itself. So we've heard about the Bigfoot, we've heard about the boxes and the voice. I did have one more question about the voice that you heard. Was it reverberating or was it in your head? Do you think?
It was reverberating. It was definitely audible. Everybody heard it. And when I do my presentation, I tried to recreate it to the best of my memory because it was very mechanical sounding. And I'll never forget the day my sister came to see me speak and she heard that for the first time. She literally had like a PTSD reaction to hearing that because I recreated to my memory where she like teared up and everything because it was. And I just did another show with Charles out of the UK, and he has experienced this disembodied electrical voice there as well, which is the first time out in a very rural area where there should be no voice. It was very mechanical sounding, just like that. And I was like, you're kidding me. And that's why I love doing these shows and talking with other people, because people are like, or I'll get emails, through my website, like, oh my gosh, I've had an experience with a box or a voice or something. And these are things that are so unusual and strange. We have a tendency to we don't want to be judged or ridiculed or anything. So we don't talk about these things.
But we should talk about these things. I mean, I'm of the opinion, and maybe I'm kind of rare, I just don't care what people think.
I'm getting there too.
It's truth. It's truth. If that's what you believe and that's what, conviction, go for it. And I know people don't like being made fun of and stuff, and that's what's behind it, isn't it? Is the ridicule factor. But we need to do away with that, otherwise we'll never get to the truth.
That's true.
So that if you're listening to this and you've got a story, tell somebody, because you never know what it might be the key to something bigger that people have been searching for. You could be that key.
That's so true.
So there's that. So yeah, sorry, back to the ranchy malarkey. What other little things what other little stories have you got?
Malarkey.
Malarkey. So what sort of stuff happened to you, or
something that really stood out for me as I'm reading the document? There was talk of, and in the notes it said that 2 interceptor jets were scrambled after a UFO, and they crashed. Okay, it had a midair collision and they crashed.
But both jets crashed, or a jet into a UFO?
Yeah, in pursuit of a UFO. And I'm like, okay, well, certainly if 2 interceptor jets crash, there has to be some documentation about this. So I researched it, found the newspaper article. I asked Richard Doty when I saw him at a conference. He said, oh, you can FOIA Kirkland Air Force Base Mishaps Office, which I did. And I get this big thing back on the crash.
Crikey.
And what had happened is Buckley Air Force Base, which is now Space Force, and look at some of this redaction in there.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
It's pretty detailed. But long story short, there were two interceptor A-7D scrambled out of Buckley, then Buckley Air Force Base at night. In this report, it claims it was a student and an instructor. They had 255 live rounds of ammunition on board. And in this is one of the lists of the causes of the crash. It said the instructor misidentifies the beacon light of another aircraft, which, by the way, is never mentioned what the other aircraft was. Doesn't say it was a Cessna. Nothing in the radio transcripts. And he hits the tail of the students, and they both went down. Both pilots ejected. Both pilots survived the crash.
Oh, good.
Both interceptors were lost. But I find it interesting, a couple things, that they would be flying over residential areas with live ammunition with a student. I've asked people in the Air Force, though, and they're like, no, that can happen. But I also find it interesting that so much is redacted out. They mention another aircraft, but don't identify it. And then when I went to David Marler's to do some research, just in that same year, the NORAD facility up there in Canada admits to scrambling 2 interceptors in pursuit of a UFO or unidentified craft on radar. And we do know through the interviews I've done with the sheriff and other people that not only was the Air Force and NORAD very much aware of what was going on out there, we had the Colorado Bureau of Investigations involved. They actually issued a no-fly zone, and we have unidentified objects seen on radar out of Stapleton Airport. So we know all of these things were occurring. So it makes sense to me that they would have scrambled a jet after unidentified craft on radar. And I think this is one of those cases.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you said. I mean, why would you carry live rounds if it was a training exercise?
Exactly.
Did you investigate that? And is that the norm for the Air Force to do that?
I've asked a few people that are in the Air Force. Some say yes, it's the norm. Some say no. So I'm getting mixed.
Oh, okay.
And for the year, like I have to consider what decade we're in. So I need the norms for 1976, 1977.
Makes sense,
I need the norms for that. So I'm still, that's something I'm still kind of looking into. But there's just so many different rabbit holes you go down with this.
Okay. What other things did you personally witness at the ranch?
I think I covered them all basically.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, the night, the circle on the ground, the things that followed me home, those kind of things. But something I've looked at in comparing these high strangeness locations. So MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, before they had the CMS system, which is the case management system, so all the reports people send go into a database that's online. Well, before we had the internet and online, everything was done the old-fashioned way on paper.
Mm-hmm.
So MUFON started a project where we took, tens of thousands of reports, and I headed up a team of redactors that took all the sensitive information out of all these old reports on papers and reading all these old reports. So I've read thousands of reports from the past. I came across another high strangeness location in Ohiopyle, Pennsylvania that had very similar, the Sasquatch, the orbs, even the boxes, all of it. And so I started looking at these different areas. We have the Bradshaw Ranch in Arizona, the Blind Frog Skinwalker Ranch. We have Marley Woods in Missouri. We have Trey Hudson's down south. We have the Ohiopyle, Pennsylvania, there in Pennsylvania and Colorado. What do all these locations have in common? One thing they have in common is they all are extremely highly magnetic areas. They ping the charts of being magnetic. They have certain kinds of limestone, granite, crystals. And recently, if you haven't watched it yet, David Pilati's new film, The UFO Connection, at the end of his film, he talks about aquifers under, this water underground.
Yeah.
So I was curious if the Elbert County Ranch had aquifers. And in fact, right where the ranch sits, we have 2 major aquifers that come right together. So we have the combination of highly magnetic water and certain crystals. And I'm wondering if that allows us to interact with the phenomenon, opens up portals, creates a phenomenon, but it's certainly the case in all these, it's a commonality that all these places have in common.
Yeah, I've heard that before about the aquifers, something to do with the running nature of the water that, I don't know, gives off some sort of energy. What was the film of David Paulides?
It's the Missing 411, the UFO Connection.
Missing 411, yeah.
Which
I know
he
had the book, didn't he?
Yeah, I'm so happy he finally went down that UFO path, because for years he was doing the missing. He wouldn't touch it.
He would never. He was on the fence.
He was on France. But then he finally did the film. I'm like, thank you, Dave. So he's a good guy.
The amount of times he was on Coast to Coast and I was listening and they would push him and he would never commit. And it was like, come on, it's got to point you in a direction, surely. Well played on that one. Yeah, that's interesting about the magnetics, because a few others, again, I've spoken to have said the same thing. It seems to be related to the magnetics, that even the UFOs are attracted and maybe like garner power from the magnetic lines. I don't know, all to do with ley lines and things, isn't it?
Ley lines, yeah, could be.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Now, the cattle mutilations on the ranch, you mentioned Linda Moulton Howe earlier. So some of her, Strange Harvest, I think it was her film.
Yeah. Did
that happen on the ranch in question?
Well, yeah, if you watch A Strange Harvest, they interview Bill Waugh, who is I flew to Florida and interviewed his widow and his youngest son. He was the undersheriff of the town that it's a little town called Kiowa at the time. And also in that film is George Yarnell, who was the sheriff of Elbert County. So both of those gentlemen are in her film A Strange Harvest. And just recently I was at Contact in the Desert, and it kind of came full circle for me to sit there and have a conversation about the ranch with Linda one-on-one in person. It really meant a lot to me because she is just such a pioneer and a force, especially for females in the field. So shout out to Linda and a thank you for all her hard work. One of the most interesting cattle mutilation interviews I did was with a woman. Her family basically pioneered this little town in Elbert County. And she lives in Wyoming now. So I drove out to Wyoming to interview her, and they've had several different encounters. But right out of high school, she was married and moved to a small town called Ramo, which is right outside. It's right on the border of Elbert County. So it's very close to all this high strangeness stuff. And her husband was on horseback checking the cows for calves, came across a dead calf. Okay. And the calf had 4 cuts in a perfect square with the top of the fur removed, but the skin was still there. And he's like, this calf was dead. He gets on his horse. He goes back to the ranch house, gets my witness. They come back in the pickup truck. She said it took 25 minutes approximately to get back there. In the time they were gone, that calf had been completely mutilated, cauterized, organs removed, blood drained. They said it felt evil. It felt eerie. They felt like they were being watched. They were miles off the county road. She's like, it's not like somebody could just pull up and do this to the calf. So it was like he interrupted a mutilation in progress. There was no tracks, no truck marks, no sounds, no nothing. They said it felt very evil to them. And the cool part was we're friends on Facebook still to this day. She's like, hey, Katie, you're not going to believe this. I found the Polaroids of the calf. So I have the pictures of the calf that this occurred. And to me, that's one of the coolest interviews I've done on a mutilation, because it's like they interrupted it in progress. And it was not humans doing it.
2 things on this. One, obviously, they've said it could be government ops in the helicopters. Well, it can't be the helicopters in this instance, because they'd have seen it and or heard it if it was half in the middle of.
Yeah, and footprints and everything else.
Yeah, of course. Second thing, have you got those Polaroids digitized that you could send over?
I do. Yes, I can.
If you're willing, and then I could put them on the screen at this point, because it's highly interested in the cattle mutilations.
Yeah.
Now, with Linda's film, I've not seen it yet, right? I've just not been able to get hold of it or whatever for whatever reason.
Right.
And I'll put it on my list again to watch, to try and find. But
yeah, I'll see if I can send you a link to it.
If you can, that would be amazing. Does all the data from her original film still stick to this day, or has things been updated since, so she could make like Strange Harvest 2, do you think?
I think she can make Strange Harvest 2, because there's so much that either has come to fruition or has not. Theories that they were really looking at back in the day that we can now, all these decades later, go, that's not really a viable explanation, like the cults and things like that. Yeah. So I think that yes, certainly I would love to see her do a part two of that. And I do know, like when I did the interview with Bill Waugh's widow, there was a lot in that interview that he felt, and I got this from third person from his widow, but that there was so much more that he wanted to say that didn't make the film. So I think she had to keep some of the more high strangeness things that were being reported almost out of that film, because it was, like you said, it's hard to digest, and it just seems so like, but he was kind of like, they left this out and this out and this out. So there's more to the story.
And those are the interesting things for us now, this far down the line, that we want to really know about, and to push it further. Right, I said this to somebody the other day, I can't remember who it was, but like the recent hearings in Congress or wherever it is about the UFO stuff, they can only go so far and explain sort of like, this is the nuts and bolts craft that we got so far. They don't want to push down the abductions. They don't want to push the psychic abilities and all that, do they? Because you turn away the masses.
That's right.
That's probably why Linda kept it out.
Right. And even with MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, I love it. I love that they're scientific and they have their training and their protocols and that. And that, I do appreciate that side of it. But they too have to like really focus on nuts and bolts craft sightings. They do have the ERT team. But they can't get into all of the ghosts and Hat Man and Shadow Man because, there's not that you lose credibility, but it does get so far out there, you have to draw a line somewhere in the sand and go, this is what we're focusing on. We're not, don't report the ghosts here, just the craft. And I understand that. And I can appreciate that. At the same time, being somebody who's experienced the High Strangeness Ranch, I feel they're all intertwined and connected. So, that's where I'm like, I can kind of live in both worlds a little bit,
Very, very strange, this whole scenario. Can we really wrap all of the paranormal scenarios together, or are they separate and overlapping?
Separate and overlapping.
Yeah, that's what I think as well.
I think just because you have a UFO encounter doesn't necessarily, doesn't connect to Grandpa Joe, spirit coming to visit you. They're separate. Those are separate. But I don't know.
Have you ever seen Grandpa Joe?
I have not seen Grandpa Joe. I've heard Grandpa Joe. I've heard footsteps. I've had things physically move around and all that kind of stuff. That could be Grandpa Joe. But
tell me a story. Tell me a story of when something's moved around in your house.
Well, I could tell you my dad's story really quickly. So
okay.
my dad was a ladies' man. He was married. Sorry, Dad.
But you were.
Yeah. But you were. He was married 4 times. So after his 3rd wife passed away, I told you I started that story in that house. It only took him a couple months to meet another woman, Liz, and they got married in that backyard of that home.
Okay.
And his 3rd wife was not happy about this. And so what would happen, my dad he loved his Pabst Blue Ribbon, and he would frost his beer mugs in the freezer. He had the old type of freezer that you would open like this, and he put his beer mugs on there. Well, after he married his 4th wife, the frost, he would go to open the freezer to get his beer mug, and they would fly out and just
crikes.
Yeah, and break. Same with the light at the bottom of the stairs would just shatter constantly. Like, she was pissed, I think, that he married this other woman. Footsteps on the thing all the time. And so they had 2 front bedrooms, their master bedroom and then a guest bedroom. And my young son at the time was using this bedroom. But this is the bedroom where she kept, in the closet, she kept all her favorite coats and dresses, her most special clothes. And after my dad married this 4th wife, that closet kept flying open, just kept coming open. Well, when I lived there, it never opened until we had to move out. And I was kind of afraid because I knew the stories Dad told me about that closet opening. So I was kind of afraid and I walked in to pack up that closet, and that thing just flew open. I was like, ah! So that happened. But so many those kind of like poltergeist type of things happened to my father. But I think it's because she was so mad at him. And I often wonder now in my head, now that my dad's passed away, if they like reconciled on the other side, if she's still mad, if the house is still haunted. I want to knock on the door.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know.
Do you have a ghost? Because if you do, I know who it is.
Exactly. It's weird to know. Well, not weird to know. It'd be interesting to know if that energy is still imprinted at that location or has passed on because he has. Right. Very interesting. Now, a question that came to mind when you mentioned your children. It's often said that children young up to like 5 to 7 or whatever still have the ability to see, remember past lives, all that stuff. Did they see and hear?
It's interesting. So I have 5 grown children now. My youngest just turned 21, so I'm aging myself a little bit here.
Yeah, 32. No.
I'm 30. I'm 32.
Yeah.
And anyway, but so 4 boys and a daughter, and they're all very much different. They're some have had experiences, some have not, some want to experience some things, some do not, some are interested, some are not. My youngest son, however, he did not talk until he was almost 3 years old. He made a click, and we thought we were using the sign language with him. He was very much he's all caught up now. He's doing wonderful. He's going to be an aviation mechanic. He's fantastic. But when he did begin talking, so between the ages of like 3 and 5, he would call out people by color. And I was like, why are you calling everybody's color? And he would see people's auras. And I just asked him recently if he could still see auras around people. And yes, he can. He's experienced that blue orb outside our 2nd story window, outside his window. So he's experienced more paranormal things. So whatever that that phenomenon is, really likes my youngest son. He has ghostly things happen, all sorts of things happen. Other kids, my daughter a little bit, and she's very like intuitive and spiritual in that. My other ones, not so much. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know why the difference.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Especially the color thing. Again, I've not heard that
Yeah.
before. Obviously,
Yeah.
I know what auras are. What color were you?
Right. Typically I'm blue.
Okay.
But interesting also, my youngest son Tyler also, because I didn't know if I believed in like past life stuff, but when he was in those ages, like 4, 5, 6, 7, he had some interesting things come to the surface that made me really reconsider reincarnation. Just put it that way. I was like, oh, maybe there's something to that.
So
So
he's
I'm very
expressed
open
past
to
life
that.
stuff. Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is what happened to
So
me. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm really open to that as well. And there's fabulous documentaries about that that really make you consider like, wow, there's maybe something to that as well.
I'm interviewing somebody on Saturday about that very topic because that one
Oh,
is amazing. I love that.
yeah, yeah,
Now it reminded me of a question I had earlier, but I forgot it. So I've just remembered it now. Have you had any not past life regressions, but have you had any regressions based on your life there to see if anything
yeah.
came up?
Yeah, so getting to know Dr. Leo Sprinkle, and I would go down every few months to the Heritage Center, and what happened with Letters of Love and Light. I don't know if I have a copy. Oh, I do right here. This book right here really came to fruition because what happened is I went to research the ranch, and for 3 years I would go every few months, go to the archives, and I'd pull Dr. Sprinkle's boxes and I'd take pictures of all the letters that people wrote him from around the world. And luckily for all of us, he kept his response letters, because back then it's typing, so he had all the copies of his letters. So I would take hundreds of pictures, come home, read the letters, put them into folders on my computer, whether they dealt with, abductions, craft, hypnosis, or whatever. Well, Dr. Sprinkle, getting to know him, says, with your experience on the ranch, I'd really like to put you under hypnosis. So we did, and I went under for an hour and a half. It was a really cool experience because I've never experienced that before. It's different than what I thought. I was, old school, where I was taught like, you are gonna walk across and do what I say, and it wasn't that at all. It's like just a really deep meditation, where my eyes were closed, but I was aware, but in a very deep, relaxed state. What I found fascinating about that experience for me, and it took me like a week to listen back to the tape because it kind of freaked me out a little bit. But what came through was like the first 20 minutes of that hypnosis session, it was that little girl, Katie, finding her voice to stand up to the adults in order for me to talk about it, because I was shut down and told not to talk about it for decades. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. And it was interesting to me that psychologically I needed to stand up to those adults and say, I'm going to talk about it now. And so I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
So that block was
cool
still there in
experience.
your mind,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
What else came up, or do you not want to say? Was there any oddness? You don't have to.
Yeah.
We can gloss.
No, one of the chapters in this book is entitled Dreams or Memories, because so many people said, I don't know if this was a memory or if this was a dream. If it was a dream, it was the most vivid, real dream I've ever had. And I was on a craft and this happened. And I kind of had the same kind of experience with that. Like, I have flashes of things, and what came through basically was I was on a craft. I was looking through like a transparent window. I was told that these beings were like well-oiled machines. That word came out through my hypnosis. We're well-oiled machines, and we are trying to get some sense of our humanity back, or creativity back. That humans are very musical and artistic and bipolar and emotional, and they've lost that. And that's why
Whoa.
they're here. And that's what came through under hypnosis. And I'm just like, because I don't really consider myself an abductee or a contactee, or because I don't know for certain, but that's what came out. So I'm like,
Yeah, and that's weird, isn't it? Because initially you would have never said you were taken or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's only when you go into
And
the
I still
regression.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably don't want to either. I don't blame you on that one. I wouldn't
Yeah,
want to either. But it's
right.
interesting that people who don't know it or have any indication go in it, go into the regression, and then it appears. And I spoke to somebody a few days ago asking them the scope of this scenario,
Hmm.
also a regression expert, and it was millions upon millions of people having this experience.
Right,
And a lot of them weren't consciously aware that they were taken.
right.
That's telling you something about the agenda, and you've just given a puzzle piece there, which is to say they've lost creativity. Now, again, I've not heard that before. I've always thought it was of the case they've lost the ability to reproduce, hence why they take sperm and ovum and stuff.
It's sort of like the book The Giver in a way, where they become so AI, or maybe they are just like with I do a little show on kgradb.com on Tuesday nights, and we're going to have this week Dr. Michael Masters on again, and he talks about ET being us in the future, that
Yeah.
we are progressing into that. And if we're going with, Neuralink and AI, and we're going to become AIs ourselves, maybe that is us in the future, and we're missing this, who we are right now. And maybe they want that back, or they're trying to steer us so we don't go into AI, so we don't go down that path, and maybe we can change a timeline, or I don't know. But it makes you wonder.
It does make you wonder, and I'm going to raise another point here about if they have lost the ability to reproduce and they're coming back to sort of alter the timeline again. There's been
Mhm.
this massive push on migration around the world, because it's been well documented that we're losing our ability to reproduce. Yeah, the like
Right.
sperm level and all that's going down, and
Yeah.
by introducing people from other areas, they're bringing that back up again. I wonder if that's in reaction to.
Could be part of it. Could be
Yeah,
part of it.
it's just a thought that has been there in my mind for a while. So it's
Yeah.
again a weird thing. Now your book then, which also got an award, didn't it, for the longest title ever? What is it?
Which book, the
Give
second
the
one?
full title.
Are you talking about the new book?
No,
It's
your
kind of a
Letters of Love
working.
and Light. It's got
Oh
like
yeah, 4 decades
72
of
different things.
UFO encounters, experience, and sighting shared with ufologist Arleo Sprinkle. So this was such a labor of love to really honor a pioneer in the field's work. And I'll tell you, that was the best journey for me, to spend that time looking at a pioneer's life. And I asked him, he had cancer, he was in hospice. He knew he was facing the end. He has spent his whole life, 40 plus years, dedicated to this field. And I got to look him in the eye and go, Leo. And he'd always go, yeehaw. Anyway, I said, Leo, do you have any regrets? You're going to pass away and you don't have the answers you spent your life seeking. And he went, yeehaw, and he said, Katie, it's the journey. It's the people you meet along the way. It was what he was interested in and what he was dedicated to. And so he had no regrets in
Mm,
dedicating his life to this field. And it gave me a very, very deep respect for all the pioneers that came before us. And it also gave me a very healthy respect for podcasts and internet and what we have at our fingertips now that he did not have.
mm,
Because if you look behind me, you see all these books and magazines, and they're chock full of fabulous information. But in order to read all this, it would take me a lifetime, and now we can just and have it at our fingertips. And I think, with smart computers, and I think we're finding the answers faster. In fact, I think that's part of why we have the disclosure and this rollout happening. And I also find it interesting, Navy, although didn't do it voluntarily, but was kind of pushed to the forefront there. And Air Force has been remaining very quiet and hush hush about it. And I think that because there's, in the research I've done, liabilities with these black access projects and secrets and things that were hidden and kept from the general public. And they don't want to be called out on that. They don't want all those truths coming out, because if they lied about all that, we'll never trust anything they have to say ever again. And so I think it's a very fragile dance that they're dancing right now, because of podcasts like yours and others, this information is rolling out and more people can communicate and talk from around the globe like we're doing right now, and they can't stop it, and they know they can't stop it. So they have to
Exactly.
control the narrative. And I think that's what they're trying to do, is control the narrative. In fact, in one of the first hearings, that was literally said, like, how do we keep the general public hushed up and quiet? Like, you get out of the car, let us take over and steer this the way we want to steer it. And I'm like, oh, that's trouble, you know.
But at the end of the day, light will come out, the truth will come out. No
Yeah,
one's can stop truth. They might
right,
have a moratorium on it for 100 years, but it ain't going to be the end all, is it? Because
right.
now we've reached the tipping point of podcasts and stuff that many, many millions of people can get to, and they don't watch the propaganda on TV. So they're getting right from the
Yeah,
source, aren't they?
right. Yeah. And they can't stop it, and they know they
No.
can't stop it.
And
So
I love that. If you had to, or sorry, no, let's go from Leo's perspective. Did he ever boil it down to you and say, here's where I put my suitcase of money on?
yeah, he actually did a really cool, and I don't have my glasses with me, but he called them packs. And he really, through all the research he did, he kind of found commonality, or a common sequence of events for most contactees and people that he put under, and he named them PACS, PACTS. The P stands for preparation and early childhood visitation. The A is typically abduction, which he often saw in preteens and also later. Then it was the contact, and which is adult contact. So you have your early abduction, which I often hear between the ages of like, God, 9 years old to 15, those years. And then you get into this training, which is what the T stands for, which is people get really obsessed with, like, watching all the documentaries, reading all the books, learning from other people. This is like a training where a lot of the people he worked with felt like they were on a mission or a task, like they had to, like, save the environment. A lot of people felt like, we're here to save the environment, or I'm here to do this scientific breakthrough, or everybody had like different tasks or mission they felt they were put on this earth for. And then the last one is service. And I feel like people that do podcasts like you, me, myself, I feel like we're in that S stage, or I at least feel like I'm in that S stage of service, where, okay, I've done all this work for all these years. Now it's service to put it out there and share it with everybody else. And he saw this pattern over and over again with people. So he did come up with that, which was really interesting, but it was fascinating too, because we had, there were letters that were written to him from Linda Moulton Howe, from Phil Klass, from, the debunkers and it was interesting to see how he handled all those different things. And I can say he's somebody I really admire and respect, because no matter the views, he always dealt with everybody with such dignity and respect. And I find Linda does that as well. So,
Oh yeah, and you should,
yeah,
because
yeah,
there's no point turning people away from the subject. You're supposed to bring them
right,
to it to enhance
right.
learning. But so he's got this guide, if you will, with the pacts. How did he boil it down? What did he think the agenda was, or did he not conclude?
It's interesting. Almost every time I would go see Leo, he would always bring up this: until humanity wakes up and gets, basically, he was really he believes that we have Tesla free energy, and that it's been hidden from us. And until that is used and open to the world. And he also had a big thing about equality for women and empowerment of women, and holding, basically he was about breaking down the hidden technologies and the treatment. Everybody's equal. Like, he was always about that. Like, so I think those were his two main, like, until we can figure those two things out, we'll never be allowed into the Galactic Federation, or, allowed into being equal with our space brothers and sisters, until we can get it right here on Earth, until we stop hiding technology and ruining our environment and putting women down and all that. We got a lot of work to do on this planet, and that's what he believed.
So essentially, we need to raise our consciousness to get to a point where we can cope with whatever they're doing.
Right.
Did he think that's what they were doing, raising our consciousness?
I think he believed in a hybrid program that,
Yeah.
but again, who's doing the hybrids? Is there different races coming down here And then does that mean humans are divided as well? Let's say we have reptilians and Dracos, and I know there's researchers out there that this is their specialty and their thing, is not mine, but I have heard these theories that, you know, certain races are messing with DNA, whether it's the Palladians, the Greys, the Reptilians, the Dracos, and we're divided, and we need to raise our consciousness and take care of things before we can ascend basically up to that. And I don't know if that's true or not true, but I do know it's theories out there. And I do believe Leo kind of thought possibly that was happening, both good and bad races, if you want to put them in boxes like that. I don't know. I don't think we can put all good or all bad in a box, because we're not that, for sure.
No, everything's a spectrum from 1 to 0 or whatever. The gray zone, isn't it, in between? Right. So from your book, where have you landed on it all? Do you match what he thought, or do you deviate from that?
I think where I am is, I think there's military secrets, and you know, I have happenstance to a very high up person who was really high up in General Electric, an engineer. And he's like, a lot of what's coming out now is that we've been back engineering these craft for decades. And I believe that's true. I believe technology's been hidden with us. So I do believe a lot of what is being seen as our own technology. I think we're 40, 50, even 60 years more advanced than what the common person knows. Yeah. So I tend to believe that a lot of the phenomenon is our own. But when it comes to the high strangeness, that I think that is unexplained paranormal. So I think we're doing this. I think both things are true. That's where I land. That's what I feel. We have the ghosts and the spirits and the shadow beings, and that's still all in that realm. And even like Bob Bigelow and other people, they want to be able to scientifically study this. That's what they're doing at Skinwalker Ranch. That's why they're doing these other ranches. They're like, we want to be able to control this and record it and make it work on command. That's another thing that happened on the show. They had a ham radio. They flew in a ham radio operator, and the old section of the house, they put in equipment, and they wanted to see if the house would communicate, you know, up here, the kind of like, hello, we're here. And the ham radio guy was trying to communicate, and nothing was showing up on the monitors. And the producer said, hey, you know, let's see if Katie can do it. So he held the radio, and hey, remember me, I'm back. And all the equipment. And I got to repeat that 4 times, 3 times on the ham radio and 1 time without the radio at all, where they were scrambling. I'm just like, hey, like I was getting in fighting mode, and all the equipment was like the house was communicating with me. That's unexplained. I don't think that's something else. And I think they want to try to measure that. And unfortunately, that kind of phenomenon isn't something we can queue up all the time.
It's obviously like you were, or your DNA or something like that, or your energy was being read, and then, oh, we know you, we'll respond.
We know you, yeah. And it took my silver bracelet. That's another thing in the report. I had a Celtic silver bracelet that I wore for years and years and years and years, and I lost it at the ranch. I was devastated because it was a custom-made thing. And it says in these reports that they would bait the land with silver and turquoise, and when they would put silver and turquoise, the activity would raise up. I don't know what that's about, but that was reported. And I know there's other ranches out there trying to experiment with baiting and doing different experiments like that.
Yeah. A quick question about your silvery, did you say bracelet? Sorry.
Bracelet.
Yeah. Was it on you and then it was suddenly gone, or was it down and you were sleeping at night and then it was gone?
No, it was on me, and we were shooting the rockets. We shot 4 rockets off for that episode, and there's snow on the ground, and it's never fallen off in years and years and years. And I looked down, I'm like, and I looked and looked and looked, because it's my favorite bracelet, but it's gone. And I just thought it was weird that of all the places to lose it, the ranch.
Yeah, like bit coincidental.
Yeah.
Which raises a question. You've heard of the apport phenomenon, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's been taken and then it's now somewhere else? It's been apported somewhere.
Someone's got a silver bracelet. It's going to show. When it shows up on my kitchen counter.
Was it engraved with a return address? That's what you want.
Right. That will be really scary. No, I tell the people that live on the ranch, I'm like, keep an eye out for my bracelet. It's going to show up someday. Maybe I just dropped it in the snow. Maybe
Yeah,
it
you
was
never
all
know.
coincidental, but it still freaks me out a little bit.
You need to get out there with one of your what are they called?
Metal
Metal detectors.
detectors.
That's it. That's what
Yeah.
you need to do. Let's take a side track into your radio show. It's called MUFON What's Up. Is that right?
Yep. MUFON What's Up on kgradb.com Tuesday nights from 8 to 10 Eastern, 6 to 8 Mountain Standard Time. And it's a fun little show. I have a new co-host joining me. My other co-host, Chris DePerno, is moving to another show, which will be a fascinating show coming this fall, which is more like a panel discussion, which I love that because I love debate. But we have Shane Hurd coming in and Tara Diulis are my co-hosts. And it's a 2-hour long show. We try to keep it a little lighthearted and fun for the first 20, 30 minutes of the show with some fun UFO products and current topics. And I try to do a case of the week out of MUFON every week, and then we bring in a guest. And so it's a fun way to get to know people. And, as that's a great way to hear other people's experiences. So
yeah, it's another avenue to get to the answers that you're searching for.
Yeah.
What led you to that show? What made you
they
start
asked.
it? Oh, okay.
They asked if I would do it. It took me like a year to agree to it. I'm like, oh, I don't do that. I'm not a radio person. I'm not. But then it occurred to me, like you just said, it's a great way to continue the research. And so it was selfishly, I do it for 2 reasons. So I can put it out there for everybody, but also for me to learn and to try and make connections, because I'm always trying to make those connections through other people.
Has there ever been anything said while doing part of your interviews of that's clicked for you and thought, oh, that's the key to this?
Yes.
Can you give us an example of any of that?
Well, one time I had Seb talk on, and Seb is fantastic. She's wonderful. And she was going on about motives for ET abductions and, things keeping us down and And she's talking and she goes, yeah, well, through hypnosis, I was told they're well-oiled machines. And I just kind of, I'm like, oh, did you just because she
That
had
very
no
phrase,
idea. She goes, I've never said those words out of my mouth before. I don't know what caused me to say them. So that was kind of weird coincidence will happen from time to time, like that, or just random, just like the podcast I just did like a week and a half ago, where he said, oh yeah, disembodied electrical voice. And those moments I love, because I'm like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
and so I actually sent him the recording to see if it mirrored what he heard, because that's fantastic if make that connection.
Yeah, I also love those coincidences because it lends some credence or validation, doesn't it? And then it helps you not feel so, not weird is the wrong, you know what I mean? Sort of alone, I think, is probably the best way of putting it.
Right.
And TV appearances. What have you done thus far, and have you got anything else coming up?
Yeah, I just did George Norrie's Beyond Belief on Gaia, so that was fun. And I've done like On the Trails of UFOs, and I was just in the film Accidental Truth with Ron James. So that was a fun little project. And Beyond Skinwalker. This is actually comes from Dr. Sprinkle, actually. If you get a knock on that door, I always open it, see who's behind it. And this is a funny story. So I get a call, hey, can you come down to Denver and do this interview for this event that's happening? And I have a tendency to not always research everything I do. Like, okay, yeah, I'll be down there. When, where? I show up and this gentleman walks in the door and I'm like, you look really familiar. He goes, yeah, I'm a famous actor. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, blah, blah, blah. And I, he's wearing a mind control shirt. I didn't know who it was. Turns out it was Paul Giamatti, who's been in 150 plus some films. I had no idea until I got home later that night and I looked him up. But we sat and talked. I was supposed to do an hour-long show with him. It turned in 2 hours because we just had the most fantastic conversation. I had no idea he was so interested in all things paranormal, UFOs, mind control, and all that. And it was just a fabulous opportunity, but I had no idea who he was. So yeah, it's cool to have these opportunities. More importantly, I'm just excited that the Colorado ranch is finally getting the recognition it kind of deserves. I mean, Skinwalker kind of came in, and I'm like, but wait, all this predates that by a lot, and it's
Yeah.
very almost mirrors it identically. So it's important.
It is important because it's like you say, it's validation for that ranch as well, isn't it?
Right.
It's adding more
Yeah.
to the puzzle again.
Right.
Let's talk about some big topics. So the whistleblower, David Grush, and the hearings and that. What are your thoughts on that? How did you take it when it first came out?
I'm careful on that because I've always felt from the very beginning, starting with Lou Elizondo, and I hope I don't get myself in trouble here, but I think maybe it just comes from maybe understanding my background with the military involvement with the ranch. I come in as very leery of all this, as if this is an agenda, roll out a way to control a narrative.
I see.
So I look at it through that lens. So I'm not one to. At the same time, I'm happy that it's gaining traction and getting out there to the masses. I find it a little funny that this is like mind-blowing information that's coming out. Back engineering crafts, we have alien bodies, and people are like, all right, let's go see the Barbie movie. Like nobody
Exactly.
really cares.
This is
It's like,
why the suppression of the information is stupid because people won't care. It's like I said
right.
to I think Preston not long back.
Yeah.
They'll come out with all this and it'll be on news and TV. The president will announce it, and then literally the next day you go into work and you're talking about what you're having for lunch
Exactly.
because you've
Which
got to
is true.
live.
Yeah, you do have to live. And that's so, with our meetings, we had a gentleman who had a lot of really, although, we didn't have documents to prove any of this, it was all anecdotal, whatever, but he gave presentations on S4 and aliens and how they absorb nutrients through their skin and
Skin,
all this
yeah.
mind-blowing information. And after on my phone, I get a message from my elderly mother who needs, her medicine picked up at the pharmacy and some creamer for her coffee. So here I am leaving the meeting going, okay, I just learned all this great stuff about S4 and aliens, but yet I need to get medication and creamer for my mom's coffee because you have to live. What else are you going to do? I mean, I don't know. I guess it's nice we have it so we won't be so shocked if something does come down. And there are rumors that we're on this timeline, this 4-year timeline where something big in ufology is going to happen. And so those of us who are awakened to this information maybe will manage a little better than those who are not.
What date have you heard? What is expected to be the thing? What have you heard?
That's good. I heard it, rumored at Contact in the Desert. And I know it's out there being rumored. I'm hearing a 4-year timeline, and that those in the know that knows the clock's ticking down to some event. And I asked that question to the people who are saying that. I'm like, well, what's going to happen? Is this like a end of the world scenario? Do I need to buy food and water? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And they didn't have the answers for me. So I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't
So
know if
where's it coming from then?
monetary.
This whole rumor of this thing, because somebody obviously must have started it.
Yeah.
I've heard
I'm
2030 and all sorts.
what I've sort of heard is if there were deals made with ET, like back in the Eisenhower administration, that there was a timeline on
I
that,
got
and
you.
that timeline is ticking away. And so if it's a matter of ET coming down and saying, hey, I'll be like good, bad, or otherwise, like finally, finally you're here, we need the help. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's breakdown of monetary systems. I don't know if it's global catastrophes. I don't know what, but apparently somebody knows something. And that's why this rollout's happening the way it is. That's what I've heard.
I've also heard that, but then I also heard that the Millennium Bug would be the end of the world, and we passed through that, didn't we?
I know. I mean, the end of the world is like every few years, and we've managed to survive. So here we are. What cracks
Yeah.
me up though, like in 1999, as the clock striking midnight, which I always never understand that because there's all these different time zones, right? So I'm like, well, it's midnight in New York and they're still fine, but I was waiting for it to turn in Colorado here, and I'm thinking, okay, so most likely we're gonna be blown to smithereens. We're not going to survive this because 1999, the world's going to end. And I'm like, I found myself having a cocktail and I was playing poker. I'm like, this is how I'm going to go out.
Yeah,
With a
doing
cocktail
normal
poker. What
stuff.
are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a time actually where, and I've never told anyone this before. I don't even think I've told my girlfriend, where I walked up to Tesco's, which is a shopping, you call it a mall, just up the way,
Yeah.
supermarket. And then as I was walking towards the supermarket, I saw this couple walking from a different direction towards the supermarket, but they were looking up in the sky.
Uh-oh.
And they saw this thing and they were stopped. And then that made me look up, and it was
Right.
this weird black thing just going slowly over the sky, right? And the weird thing is, I'm highly into the UFO stuff. I sort of
Right.
looked at it, looked at them, and we were like for 5 seconds or so, and then we just both carried on in the supermarket and probably forgot about it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
It happens
So
a
even I
lot.
saw something weird and didn't give a shit. I know that sounds awful, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, happens
It's
a lot.
weird. Yeah.
Or we forget to get like we'll be watching, and this has happened a couple like watching something, you're trying to figure it out, and you don't think to grab your phone or your whatever, and you're just like, okay, well, what are you gonna do? Like you can
Yeah.
report it to MUFON, I suppose. That's always a good thing. But so many lights in the skies or flashes or so many things that are just so hard to pinpoint because these things, these fast movers, and they're under our oceans too. That's a whole other phenomenon I find fascinating. They move so dang fast. I mean, it's just like, woo, we can't catch them.
Yeah. Whoa. Right. So that's that one. I think I've already asked this one earlier about the abductions in general. What do we think the scope is? And did we really cover what did you think it was for the betterment of humanity or negative? Did we really go down that route?
I don't know, it's a tough one. Again, that's putting human motives on what the agendas are for different ET races out there. And it depends on who we're dealing with. If we're dealing with Mr. 2B AI guy, I'm not so sure it's great. Or these insect guys, I don't know. I just think that's a hard thing to pinpoint and nobody really knows. Maybe there's somebody in the know, and I'm not convinced of that. I think like with the congressional hearings, and maybe back in the day we had a handful of people in the know. Now everything's so convoluted and buried, and this, I think it's a big mess. I just think it's a big mess, and nobody really knows.
You just said that guy is Tubi AI face or whatever his name. Have you given him a name on the sly, like Dave or something?
I haven't, but maybe I need to.
Yeah.
We'll have a contest. We need a name.
Yes, bring up a name and don't call him Skinny Bob. Which
Skinny
reminds
Bob.
me, have you seen that Skinny Bob footage?
I have not.
You haven't? Oh, okay.
No,
Look at it. Look it up. It's
Skinny Bob.
purportedly and
Does he look like this?
no, it's the standard
No,
alien
okay.
grey. Look it up. It's meant to be a recording from years ago by one of our government officials or something. So definitely look that up. You'd be interested in that one. How many races do you think are interacting?
Oh boy, that's
Impossible
a
question, I suppose, but
over 12. There.
I'll go with that as well.
12 plus.
It's a strange one. You probably might have been asked this before. Living in the Matrix. Is this illusion? Are we all in a computer program?
Oh yes, that's one of my favorite topics.
Is it? Lush.
Yes.
So what do you think?
I think yes. I think we're in a simulation. I do. The more and more I'm reading about that, learning about that, I'm like, it makes sense to me. Would explain. I also believe, like I said earlier in the show, I think we're part of the phenomenon. And I noticed that way back with the ghost hunters, because I love the show The Ghost Hunters. And I got to do a couple of little events with them at the Stanley Hotel and the St. Augustine Lighthouse in Florida. But I noticed that Jason and Grant would always have a lot of activity because they really believed. And then you had the ones that don't, and then nothing would happen. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're like interacting, playing with the phenomenon. So I believe as us as observers can interact, create, and be part of the phenomenon itself.
So we're influenced the program. We're essentially writing the program as we think of it.
We're creators, each and every one of us.
Isn't it?
That's why you can have so many different people that have experiences with the phenomenon, and yet it varies a little bit, here and there and there and there, because they're writing it, they're creating it. And it's not saying it's not real. It's real in their game, in their matrix. It's real.
So then that throws up this question. And I said, again, I know I keep saying this. I said this to somebody the other day. Are you real or am I real? Am I in
Good
your
question.
reality or are you in mine?
We just had this conversation. I just said I took my son out for his 21st birthday, and that was our dinner conversation.
That's a good one, though, isn't it?
Whose game are we in? It is a great one, because whose game are we in?
Yeah, and it is. That's why, again, I thought that the other day, this is a game because we're almost within confined parameters and we're heading in a direction and we can't go back and start again. You know what I mean? We're being funneled in a direction.
Unless there's truth to Project Looking Glass, there was a project that we did have time travel and we could go back and change the timelines, right? And we can change our destiny. That perhaps could be true. And from what I understood with that Black project, that it got so convoluted and so messy, just like some films that are out there, that they had to shut it down completely. Do
you think that's where the Mandela effects come from?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So as far as whose game we're in, I suppose you're in my game.
I don't believe you. I'm going to say it's the other way around.
Right.
It's weird, isn't it?
It is.
Weird. Let's take it a step further. Let's extrapolate it out. What is the structure of it? If it is a computer program, what is the structure? So are we, the players, a soul from a dimension, and that we've created this program and then we're pushing ourselves into it? Is that what you think it is?
Well, I'm not a big gamer, but my kids were, from the very beginning. I mean, for me, it was Pong. So I've seen the evolution of games. So I always try to break it down like that. So there's so many different creators of games, different manufacturers, code writers. You could be playing, what is that big one where you're building the world?
Minecraft.
There's all these Minecraft, whatever. So I feel like it, number one, it depends on what game you're in, and are we just avatars, and can we go from, once we're an avatar and we're energy, so because games, electronic zeros, ones, energy, and we're created, that can never be destroyed, so you can't kill our avatars. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not.
It's a mind bugger, isn't it? You can't do anything. And then
I know. And my son hates it. He's like, I don't like that theory because it's so.
It is. You can't wrap your head around it. Then it also throws open the reincarnation thing, which is you live this life.
You're put in another game.
You're pushed into another game.
You're pushed into another game, which makes sense.
Yeah. I might have to give up on this topic because you could literally theorize all night, couldn't you? That's the thing.
Yeah, you could.
Which person in the UFO field have you most enjoyed meeting or talking to?
Well, for me, Linda Moulton Howe, just recently, because for me that's full circle, and I respect her as a female in the field, and she's just hung in there and kept her grounding. So many of us can come and go and get pushed out for different reasons. So I really admire her, and it was a pleasure meeting her for sure. Dr. Leo Sprinkle is another one, a pioneer in the field. And for me, almost on a daily basis, I remember how generous he was with his time, his spirit, and his energy, and how he just gave everybody an ear, and gave them his time for no money. Just, I will sit on the couch and listen to you for an hour, for 2 hours. And that is so hard to find in people anymore. And just to listen with an open mind and an open ear and not judge. And I so those are my two heroes, I guess, in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree on Linda. It used to be the case where I'd listen to Coast to Coast, and a lot of it would be a bit sometimes, but then as soon as she came on, it was like, here's a story, here's the start, this is the evidence, this is my conclusion, and it was like you could follow along, and it was like, oh, that's amazing, because you got everything, didn't you? And I loved her reports on there.
Right.
Let's move on to another section I called Happened to You. Strange things have already happened to you, by the way, because you've given me those stories. But is there what other strange things have happened to you that you've not mentioned here? It doesn't have to be a UFO or anything like that. It could be a random person being weird in your life. What strange? Can you think of a story?
I guess I could. What I would like to answer this with are synchronicities and beyond synchronicities, coincidences that cannot be coincidences. Those kind of things continuously happen, and a lot of it feels like, I talk about Leo's work of being pushed or put on a path. For an example, few years back, I was handed a case. And this
Of
case
money?
is yeah, I wish. If I ever go quiet, a case of money has been handed to me and I will disappear. However, no, this had to do with a rumor of one of the Roswell bodies. So Brigadier General Arthur Exxon rumored that one of the Roswell bodies ended up in a mortuary outfit in Denver. So long story short, I'm not getting into the whole case, but there was a family out of California who is best friends with a mortician. This body sat where they stored the chairs in this mortuary for decades. The mortician never thought there was a body in it. Curiosity killed the cat. He opens it. And at the time, he thought it was a hydrocephalic child, but there was a body in there. That body was a hold from a federal judge. The federal judge was appointed by Nixon, okay? Now, Eisenhower has a Denver connection because of Mamie. Mamie, his wife, is from Denver. So I can just say this. There's a Lowry, Fitzsimmons, Mason, Eisenhower connection to this body, okay? And there's a federal judge who, by the way, when I researched the judge and went to the archives, is the crash retrieval specialist and the infectious disease specialist for the United States. All right, big, important judge. Okay. So long story short, where this is tying back into the weird thing that happened to me, my mother is in an independent living home. She's in her 80s, and they asked me to come do a presentation for the residents. And so I put together a presentation called UFOs 101, just a little presentation for the residents. And after that, I was talking about the judge, the body, the Roswell, and they said, "You mean," I'm not going to give his name, "his widow's on the 5th floor. You want me to go get her?" The judge's wife lived in my mother's building. So I got 2 interviews with her. Things like this happen all the time to me, where it's beyond, what are the chances of that even ever happening? Like, mind-blowing things like that.
That thread was presented to you to pull on it.
I was just like, yeah. So those kind of things happen all the time for me. That's beyond coincidence. Like, oh my gosh. So I think that's strange.
I also think that's
strange. It feels like
a
video game. It's like a game. They were back in the Matrix again.
Yeah, you are led to the next point, aren't you, of interest?
Yeah.
I had a question about that and I've literally just lost it because my mind's crap. It was a good question, I promise you. Better than all the others. We'll have to move on. We are now entering the Koit zone. Koit zone! And the Koit zone, you won't know this, is just where I ask you even stranger or more random questions. More earthly questions, okay? So nothing to be scared of or anything like that. So, first question. Ice cream, pot, bowl, or cone?
Bowl. Because I have to put a little bit of milk and I got to mix it till it's soft.
So you allow it to go all runny?
Yeah. Okay. Well, not runny, just soft.
Okay. Specific. I like that one. And if you had to choose, which one are you going for? Which flavor of choice?
Mint chocolate chip.
Ah, cheeky. What sort of bike or bicycle did you own as a child?
A Diamondback with blue wheels. I loved BMX.
A BMX. Fair play. Yeah, I also had a cheeky BMX. Spiders. Kill them now or let them run amok with their evil intentions?
Kill them immediately.
Almost before you've seen them. Proactively. Have you got a spider story?
No, I don't have a spider. Well, I do. My parents, because I was terrified of spiders even when I was little. So the story was, my mom was like, "Oh, if you see a spider, just let it go." And my dad said, "No, get a shoe and kill it immediately." So there you had the difference there.
And that's stuck since.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you a very quick spider story now because it's just reminded me of one. And this is freaky. I must have been 9, 10 or something, and I was lying in bed at night, and I kept hearing this weird rustling noise.
Oh no.
In my bedroom. Yeah, and it was like a stack of papers I had on my side, and one piece of paper was like that, and that was the footsteps I could hear of a spider.
Oh, it's that big of a spider?
Yeah. We don't have big ones in England. It might have been like that worst case scenario, but that makes your skin crawl. Is there a piece of music that makes you cry?
Oh. makes me cry. I'm not a very emotional person. I hate to say it.
That's
I
fair.
do love the song. I do love the song. Who is it by? It's the song Vincent, about Vincent van Gogh. And
I
it's a
know the one you
beautiful
mean.
song. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good song, but I don't know if it makes me cry.
That's fair.
So maybe the song from West Side Story, just because the movie made me cry. But no, I don't have a song that makes me cry.
We are going to sit here until you come up with one.
Wind beneath my wings. I don't know.
No.
No.
Garlic, yes or no?
I like garlic. Yes.
So I say yes. Okay.
Yes.
Name something that annoys the hell out of you.
Oh, I have a good one. It's a pet peeve of mine. It is now, I don't know how much snow you get where you are, but what annoys me is when we get these big snowstorms in Colorado and people take the ice scraper and just do like this little part where they could just see. And I think I'm like, you're so lazy. Just uncover all your windows. That's something that annoys me. Scrape your windows,
are you
people.
shouting at them when you're driving? You bugger!
You bugger, scrape your back window. That's dangerous.
Have you ever seen anyone crack their window by boiling water on?
Yeah, that's funny.
I'd love to see that. Rain or shine?
Rain.
You like rain? Oh, okay.
I love the rain. Love a good thunderstorm. We're getting a little too much rain here lately. Normally we don't get this much rain. So there is a limit, but a good thunderstorm is nice.
Yeah, I think your lot over that side of the pond have been messing with the jet stream, haven't you? We've had the same thing for 6 weeks now.
I do think it's something else. This is unusual.
There's a lot of rain. Here's a weird one. Best type of bread?
Rye bread.
Rye bread. I don't think I've ever had rye bread. What's that?
It's rye. It's not super grainy, but it's delicious. Next time, try a rye bread.
Rye it is. Here's a good one. What's the bravest thing you've ever done?
Ooh, bravest thing I've ever done. I've never been asked that before. I guess standing up to some injustices in schools for my kids. I'm not one to sit back and be walked over. So I've been
like
brave
that.
in having to face some challenges in the school district.
Have you gone down and kicked some ass, have you?
I have, yes. With a letter, a mean letter.
I won't
That'll
write a
show
letter.
them.
Yeah.
Show them.
A strongly worded letter, yeah. They like that. Okay, so that's the end of the Koit zone. So that's the weird stuff out the way.
Right.
I know that's strange. What else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities or guilty pleasures?
I like to hike. I'm up here in the Rocky Mountains, so I enjoy actually one of my most favorite things to do is to just bird watch. I love birds. I love nature, taking hikes, reading, listening to music. I have music on all the time and I like most genres of music. So I love my music.
Who are you listening to at the moment?
I'm kind of back into my classic rock, going back to the old days. But that's a nice thing about having kids too. You get turned on to the newer music as well. So
Do we
I love,
really want
Ed Sheeran and all that good stuff.
There's not much good stuff these days, I swear. There's not. Most of it was 80s.
Yeah.
And 60s, to be fair.
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah, I also, some, but they got into that sort of like glam disco-y sort of stuff that I didn't massively like, and some of the late punk stuff wasn't amazing. But
disco is always good to clean your house with, so turn on the disco.
And then you're going around in your roller skates, aren't you?
I did. I used to compete roller skating, so yes.
Did you really?
Yes, I did. Yep.
I used to be one of those ones who would go around in the rink, and then every so often I'd be on my knees. Hurt like hell. Right, okay, so upcoming projects and your future. I got 2 questions on this. What are you currently working on right now?
I'm working on my second book on the ranch. So I'm into my 4th chapter and I'm hoping to get it done by the end of the year. So that's my big motivating goal. I'm also working on a new show that it's kind of like a working title, but it's going to be like UFO Investigations with Katie Paige, where it's going to be sort of like a podcast setup but I'm actually going to go out on the field and like take the people along as I do an interview, maybe clip it down as I go out to the field. Cause I there's something to be said for actually going on locations to places and doing face-to-face interviews. So that's a new project that I'm trying to get in the works right now. So kind of come along with me as I'm exploring the ranch.
Cool. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Any TV appearances coming up?
Possibly second season of Beyond. So hopefully that happens. And I'm working with another Sasquatch group out here in Colorado that's putting a little documentary together. So, as opportunities open like that, I'm certain open to doing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your that show Beyond Skinwalker, do you know what channel that's on?
It's on the History Channel.
Oh, God, I'll look for that, and I got that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've never seen it, so I shall look for that one.
Yeah, it's right on after Skinwalker Ranch. Again, my episode 3. I think this last Tuesday they did Chris Bledsoe. But they're looking at all of the high strangeness locations. And I actually was so thrilled when they approached me, because that has been a long time coming, where they don't just focus on one location, but look at all the different locations and look at the commonalities between them. That's how we're going to unsolve the mystery.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I hope you do find answers, because I think we all are after them.
Right.
I think my final question will be, do you think there'll come a point in your life where you move into a different chapter that's away from all this sort of stuff? Because I came into it relatively late. Well, I didn't. I always liked it. But what I mean by that is I used to have a job for 10 years, a different job for 10 years, another different job for 10 years. And now I think I'm going to move into this sort of stuff.
Right. As well did that. Yeah. I mean, raised family, got my degree late, graphic design, had my own graphic design studio, got into this full time. And I've tried to get off of this path. Like I get, because it's emotional for me. I have to process personal things, research, process. And sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. I'm just like, oh, I'm done. But something always pushes me back on. And I feel like, so it does ebb and flow a little bit for me, but no, I see myself doing this like Linda Moulton Howe, and that's another reason I respect her, and Barbara Lamb and so many others that are, Dr. Sprinkle, that have done this until the end. And I could kind of see myself in that position. Like I'll probably do this till the day I die, whenever that is. So, yeah.
I spoke to Barbara 2 days ago, I think, or maybe 3. And that's the reason I asked this question, because we were talking about this very topic of, have you landed on the path that feels right for you, or will you change? So
there you go.
Do you
The
think it feels right?
synchronicities again. Yeah, it feels right. I can't see myself doing anything else, only because I'm a dogged person, and I want answers. And sometimes I feel like I have some answers, but at the end of the day, I don't, because I don't know if it's all military, if it's like, I don't know. And maybe we'll never know, and I'm okay with that too, because I get to meet people like you and others, and that I embrace that. And I look to Dr. Sprinkle, and I remember his words, and I try to embrace every moment and every opportunity for what it is, because if one thing the pioneers have taught me, every moment's fleeting and it's not going to last forever. So enjoy every moment you can.
So it is the journey then.
It is the journey.
And the question, or not the question, the thought that every investigator always wants is, or wishes for, is, please let us have the answers on the UFOs within my lifetime. And then you see the people pass away, your Stanton Friedmans, obviously Leo Sprinkle, plus many, many others, all didn't get the answers.
But maybe they did on the other side. Yeah,
that's the thing, isn't it? That is the thing. Hey, look, I was going to say thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast. There's a lot of stuff we've gone through there. Highly interesting topics. And seriously, you could be there for all night talking about some of these big scenarios. But thanks ever so much for coming on. I will say thank you.
So much. Yeah, thank you for having me, Koit.
To watch other episodes of KoitCast, or indeed animations I've made, click the image top middle. Click the image top left to download some of my songs, and click the image top right to subscribe to my channel. And make sure you tick that notification bell so you never miss an upload.